Assalamu alaikum, sisters. I hope everybody can hear me. And I just want to say thank you to Nargis for inviting me to do this session, and I hope it's useful. The reason why I agreed to do this session is because there have been questions from my own family about this. A lot of my family work within the NHS, a lot of my friends do. And generally, I think there's been a lot of concern around the vaccines, and those concerns are valid. And I think, as scientists, the scientific community hasn't really done a good job of kind of explaining how we work or explaining our processes. And so I don't blame people for having reservations about the vaccine. And so I hope I don't want, say allay people's fears, because those fears and concerns people have, come from a genuine place. But I hope this session is informative, inshallah. And so I've put together some slides, and I know there also have been questions coming through on Facebook. And so after I present the slides, which I hope will answer a lot of, or the majority of the questions, I'll then stop sharing my screen and go onto Facebook and answer the questions that come there. So inshallah, I'm going to try and share my screen. And I've got two screens, so bear with me. So let's see if this works. Okay, I'm going to just look to see if I can see it come up, because there is a little bit of a lag with Facebook. Yes, so it has come up. So inshallah, I will start. So first of all, I thought I would give you a little bit of background on the immune system. Now, I don't want to give people an immunology lesson or be scared by this slide, but really it's just to explain that we have two parts of our immune system. We have something which we call innate immunity, or our natural immune system, and then we also have something called our adaptive immune system. And the innate immune system is made up of things like our skin, and often you can apply creams and things which stop things going in. And then it also contains lots of other cells, which I won't go into, but that are really able to kill, bacteria or other things that they sense as being foreign on, when they come into the body. And there's, some types of natural antibodies as well within the system that are naturally occurring. And these antibodies are less specific. They target a multiple range of things and common types of proteins, or common foreign, some things that the body considers to be foreign. So we have a pretty good innate immune system, and that's really our first line of defense, and that starts working pretty much as soon, straight away, and it starts developing, and really at its peak within about 12 hours. But the key part of kind of killing viruses and those other infectious agents and pathogens that can be really harmful is our adaptive immune system. And now this part of the immune system is probably the smart part, the part that learns and tries to create a response that is more specific and able to really target the pathogens, seek them out and kill them. And that's where we get the production of antibodies. And there are two key cell types involved in that, which I won't go into, but essentially the way that the vaccines work is to really trigger this adaptive immune system. And so it's about triggering this adaptive immune system to create antibodies, which then allows the cells that are infected or the viruses to be killed. And the way that the COVID vaccine works is that they're all about targeting the adaptive immune system, as I said, but also about creating a long-term memory. So these cells are able to remember the virus, and they remain in the body. So then when the next time you see the virus and it's a genuine virus, your immune system is already at its peak and it's able to recognize the pathogens and go in and kill them. And so that's really the premise of how all vaccines work. So that if, we put a small amount of something that looks like the virus within your body, which then triggers your adaptive immune system to take over and create these antibodies and these longer lasting cells that are able to go in and kill the pathogen the next time it sees it. So what's in a vaccine? I think this is one of the questions that I get quite a lot. Oh God, what's in a vaccine? Are there, anything that's haram in there? Are there, cells from dead fetuses? I don't quite know where that one came from, but a few people asked me that one. And I think a lot of the initial concerns were around, similar to the flu vaccine, whether the COVID vaccines would have any kind of animal products in there. Now, the reason why we have animal products in there for some vaccines is that they make the vaccine work more effectively. So the main part of a vaccine is obviously water. That's the main ingredient that's in there. And then you have the active ingredient, which is a small amount of your I suppose, immune response generating component, the small amount of killed virus or whatever it is that you're immunizing against. And then some vaccines also have things called adjuvants, which create a stronger immune response to the vaccine. And they're often in really small parts. So that's where you'll hear about kind of aluminium, but actually the amount of aluminium that's in a vaccine is less than you would have normally in drinking water. There's other things that might be at a residual trace, it's kind of things that are in, at 1 billion parts. So, formaldehyde sounds really scary, but actually it's naturally found in the human body. And then there's other things like preservatives and stabilizers that make it easier to transport the vaccine and make sure that it stays functional and effective for longer. So similar to kind of preservatives that you might find in food. And so when we use kind of like porcine ingredients or animal products, often it's part of kind of an adjuvant or a stabilizer. Now, with the COVID vaccines, none of them actually have adjuvants, as far as I know, and none of them have animal products in them, and they've all been certified as being halal as well. So the other question I get a lot about is the regulatory process, and why was this vaccine developed so quickly? And so before I go on to that, it's just to explain what the regulatory process looks like normally. So we start off with bench research and, understanding the disease, the virus that we're looking at, the bacteria we're looking at, understanding the genetics, trying to understand what it is that we might need to target in the bacteria or virus to kill it. And that often is probably the thing that takes the most amount of time. It can take years to try and understand that and find something that is unique to the virus that you can target that will kill the virus without causing harm to humans. So often there might be something that is on the surface of a bacteria, but actually that protein could be found in humans themselves. And so that by targeting that, you could also cause an adverse impact on people themselves. And so once we're confident that, we've got something that looks like a target, we then go into what people will often have heard about is clinical trials and phase 1, phase 2, phase 3. What do all of those mean? And, there are definitions of what we do in each of those phases. So the first phase 1 studies are really the early human studies. They're the first time that it will go into a human, and then you look at the safety of the drug. So a vaccine is a drug. You look at the safety of the drug, and then you look at how effective it is. And those studies are done in healthy people. And then we look to see actually, is it working kind of effectively like we wanted it to. And then from that, we then go on to the larger phase 3 clinical trials, which people will have heard about as well. And that's where you're looking at, you know, on a larger scale, how effective is this drug? Is it safe? And that's the big thing. And so for example, with the Pfizer vaccine, there were over 44,000 people in that phase 3 clinical trial. Half of them will have received the vaccine and the other half will have received a placebo, and or something, so which is basically an inactive ingredient. It will be, you know, be like water or sugar. And what they will do is they'll give half the people the drug or the vaccine that you're studying, and the other half will get that placebo, something that has nothing in there. And then they compare, and they will say, well, actually, how many of the people who received the vaccine went on to get COVID versus how many people who got the placebo got the virus. And by comparing, they were able to see, well, actually, of the people who got the vaccine, only a very small number, I think it was like 3 or 4, got the virus, but actually it was a much higher number of people who didn't have the vaccine, who had the placebo, who went on to get the virus. And that's when that's that number that people keep on talking about, is kind of efficacy, you know. And the Pfizer one's 97% efficacious, and the AstraZeneca one is 70% efficacious, but that's what they mean. And then we go through to the kind of scientific evaluation and authorization, which is essentially the regulatory process. And you will have heard as well about kind of the MHRA in the UK, which is the Medicines and Healthcare Products Regulatory Agency. And they have oversight of all the drugs and medicines that are used within this country, and they approve all of them. And there's very strict criteria at what they will look at, and they will look at all the data provided to them by the manufacturers leading up to that process, all the safety data, all the efficacy data, before they then approve the drug. Clinical trials are also have their own regulatory processes within them. So they have something called like an independent data monitoring committee. So again, you don't need to remember this, but essentially what this group is, they're independent to the investigators on there. They're statisticians, they're mathematicians, they're kind of clinicians. And what they do is, as the data comes in, they look at the data and go, is this working? Is this not working? Or actually saying, oh, this is a concern now, that this is, you know, it looks like there might be a reaction here, and they have the power to stop the trial. And then they also have the power to go, well, actually it is working, let's carry on. So that part of the clinical trial is really independent, and that's kind of an international standard. It's something that exists in clinical trials, you know, across the globe. We also have other parts of the clinical trial team who look at, you know, kind of patient recruitment and making sure that patients are being recruited and monitored. So there's a big regulatory kind of framework as to how we do clinical trials. Now, once they've gone through the evaluation and authorization, that's when that's when the manufacturer will go, okay, now we've got approval, now I'll make the drug. And after they've made the drug and they've marketed it out, then there's studies after authorization. And I think people forget that often, that once a drug or a vaccine goes onto the market, there's a huge amount of research that carries on. So it exists for all drugs and invasive medical devices, actually. So things like even people who have like a freestyle monitor for their diabetes monitoring, things like stents and kind of pacemakers, all of those types of devices are also subject to similar types of regulation. And what that means is, if you have an adverse event to a drug, that can be picked up and it can be reported, and it can be reported by you. It can be reported into your GP, or so that's a mechanism that we have within this country for monitoring all of our drugs and processes. And vaccines do get a lot more flack than other drugs, but actually they have a very similar process to being kind of regulated and monitored. And actually, you know, I was looking at something the other day, and one of the clinicians said to me, well, actually, one of the drugs that causes the most overdoses in the UK is paracetamol. Now, 48% of hospitalizations due to overdose are because of paracetamol, and there are over 200 deaths a year from paracetamol kind of overdose. But we all accept that paracetamol as a drug itself, you know, is very safe, and so, you know, but paracetamol causes more deaths than, you know, any type of vaccine would. But we have a lot of hesitancy around vaccines. But it's to say that there is a post-authorization process, and of course things go wrong. I know with the swine flu, for example, 6 million people were vaccinated against that, and they found like 100 people developed something called narcolepsy, or you know, a sleep disorder, and they stopped then giving people that that vaccine, because they said, well, actually, this is a rare condition. It's only occurring in the people kind of who've had the vaccine, and therefore this vaccine isn't safe. So we do have processes that allow that to be that allow drugs and vaccines to be taken off the market if we feel that they're not safe. So how have the vaccines for COVID been developed so fast? And this is quite a nice little explainer. I think the big thing for me is that first one around kind of priority and collaboration. As soon as the pandemic hit, what the Chinese scientists did was they straight away kind of found out the genetic information for the virus, and said, look, this is the sequence for this virus. And what that did was give us a bit of a head start, because normally that takes a long time to do. And also scientists are very I'll say we're very closed. We like keeping our knowledge to ourselves, and this was the first time I've really seen the scientific community kind of really come together. I remember being in meetings at the beginning of March, kind of every week on COVID, and people were talking about, right, what kind of infrastructure can we share? What do you need? How do we, you know, is there something that I can do? And a lot of research was closing in labs due to COVID, but then scientists were repurposing their labs. So even if they weren't working on COVID before, they repurposed and opened up their kind of laboratories for other scientists and for themselves to try and understand what was happening. The other thing is was the funding. A huge amount of investment has gone into this, not from just one country, but from across the world. And I don't think we can underestimate the power of having huge amounts of funding go into something, because it just mobilizes. Doing science is expensive, and it allowed, you know, that joint force of coming together and working towards a single goal really speeded things up. I think another thing people forget is that coronaviruses aren't new. This strain of coronavirus is new, but we already had quite a lot of pre-existing knowledge about coronaviruses, about viruses in general, about vaccines and how they can work. And so, you know, so these vaccines are just kind of building on the knowledge that we've built up over years. It's not something that suddenly occurred in the space of 3 or 4 months. Another big part is volunteers. So one of the biggest issues, you know, that a lot of clinicians have with clinical trials is that they find it very hard to recruit people to take part. And, you know, often you're looking at a couple of hundred people, you know, a big trial might be a couple of thousand, but in this case there were, you know, thousands of willing volunteers, you know, who were signing up to take part in the clinical trials. And so there were hundreds of people going onto the trial every day, and that just does not happen under normal circumstances. And what that allowed us to do was, you know, was be so far ahead in terms of trying to, you know, in vaccinating these people and then monitoring them and trying to understand what was happening regarding kind of effectiveness and safety. So that was another big thing. And then the other thing was the manufacturing. And I know the government has come in for a lot of criticism. People were like, oh, so, you know, so there, another question is, oh, we're protecting the companies by saying that they can't be sued for these vaccines if something goes wrong. And actually then that's showing that, you know, we don't trust the vaccines and there's something there to hide. The issue is that what the government was saying is that they will de-risk and they will take away that risk from the companies because they recognize that they're asking them to do something much more quickly than they normally would. So if I just go back to that previous slide, normally drug companies will have been going through all of these different stages, and then they would be submitting to the licensing authority right at the end of this process. When they were confident they had all the data, they had everything in line, they would submit it then. And then that can take months to do, that regulatory process of just kind of submitting all the paperwork. And then you go into the large scale production. Whereas what the government was saying was, right, at phase 3, it looks like this vaccine is going to work. So what we want you to do is to start manufacturing them now. So they speeded this process. So they didn't speed up the authorization, they speeded up the production. So they brought it forward. So the manufacturers were manufacturing the vaccines before it had been through the approval process, recognizing that actually, if they then didn't get the approval, that vaccine wouldn't go to market and it would be a waste, and it would be a waste of money, but the government would be supporting them and paying them for that. The other key thing as to why things were speeded up was how we do this scientific evaluation and authorization process. So normally the way that we work is once we have everything from the clinical trial, that's when we submit the data. But actually what the MHRA agreed to do was to start looking at the data in real time. So when that information was coming through from the data monitoring committees, they were looking at that data at the same time. So they were already ahead. So they were seeing the data as and when it was coming through, rather than waiting for it to come through as a complete package at the end. So then right at the end, there was only a small amount of work for them to do in terms of approving it. So it's not that we've cut corners or things haven't been done that would normally be done with a vaccine. It's just that actually the way we do that was made more flexible and just done in a way that normally we just don't work as a scientific community. So this explainer, I'm not going to go through it because the big question is, what's the difference between all of these vaccines? And really the difference is how they target how they target the immune system and how they package up the virus to go in. So one of the big things we've been hearing about, and people have been saying, oh, what's exciting about the Pfizer technology, why is it different, is that it's a genetic vaccine, which means that it's using RNA. So I don't want to take you back to your science lessons of trying to understand DNA and RNA, but essentially what RNA is, it's the bit that acts like kind of the paper that goes on your photocopier and tells you what proteins to make. And so the Pfizer vaccine essentially doesn't have any component of the vaccine. It just has the RNA, so it's able to tell your DNA what proteins to target. So that's kind of how that one works. And I won't go through all of this, but actually if people are interested, I've taken a lot of these resources from the British Society for Immunology, and they have a good section about explaining all of this in kind of lay terms and for the public. But the other one that I will talk a little bit about is, because it's been so much in the news, is the Oxford vaccine, or the AstraZeneca one, which a lot of people are now getting in the UK as well. So this one is slightly different because it uses it uses what we call a viral vector. So essentially it's a bit like a packet that looks like a virus, but actually isn't. And it's not able to cause any disease. And in that vaccine, they're able to package up the sequence that is of interest, which is what everybody is also probably hearing about, the spike protein. What is that? But essentially that's the part of the COVID virus that we're trying to target. And so it codes for that. And then when you get the virus, sorry, when you get the vaccine in your body, your immune system is able to recognize that spike protein and then create the antibodies to that. So, right. What else I want to say? So the next slide. So this slide is just to demonstrate to you the number of vaccines that are out there. And this was taken, I think, in November. So actually, it's already out of date because we've got the AstraZeneca one that's been approved, the Moderna one has been approved, and the Novavax one is pretty close to approval as well. So there are hundreds, you can see, of vaccines that are in the pipeline. And that's another reason. Having multiple vaccines for a condition like this is really, really important, because we need to create a huge number of vaccines in order to be able to deliver the vaccines across the world. This isn't just about the UK, and AstraZeneca don't have the capacity to make, you know, the billions of vaccines that we need to. And also some of them won't be as effective in all groups of people as others. So it's really important to have a big number of vaccines to be able to reach into kind of all communities and all parts of the world as well. So I think that's it. So I'm going to end this slideshow. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And inshallah, right. So I'm going to now look on Facebook and see what questions are coming through. Okay. Right. I'm just going to, so sorry about that. I'm just going to, got lots of comments, need to pick up the correct thread. Okay. Right. So, and actually what I will do is I'm going to answer some of the questions that came onto the threads before. Oh, and yes, you can share the slides. They're available publicly. Most of them, as I said, are from the BSI, and they're available for sharing. They're not great. I have to apologize. I copied and pasted them because I didn't have much time today to kind of put together the slides better. But right, so let me just look through the questions from before, and then I will go up and see. Right, so hopefully the first question was, how has this vaccine been made so quickly? How effective is it? And I think I explained that the effectiveness does vary from kind of vaccine to vaccine, and it's really important to also have both doses. So like I said, so once you have your first dose, that essentially boosts your immune system and it starts creating the antibodies. But having that second dose is really important, because that's the one that will really create the long-term memory, because it will go, oh, this is, you know, it will see the virus again for a second time and go, oh, you know, this is actually a problem. I need to create longer-term memory. And so having that second dose is really important. There's been confusion around the dosing of the vaccines, and I suppose this is a political question more than a scientific one, because the Pfizer vaccine, the way that clinical trial worked was they gave people the vaccine and then they gave them the second dose after 3 weeks. And, you know, Pfizer are confident that even getting a dose 6 weeks after that is fine, and it will still work. But what our government has recommended is to give that second dose after 12 weeks. Now, for me personally, I had real concerns about that, because the evidence wasn't there around whether a boost at 12 weeks would be just as effective as a second vaccine given at at 6 weeks. But, you know, there are pros and cons. Where the way this country is at the moment, we've just got such a huge number. It's better to give as many people as possible that first dose, and it's about 87% effective after that first dose. So even if you're getting that, that's good. And then after 12 weeks, it should still work immunologically. It should still work. It's just that we didn't have that evidence. Right. And then in terms of the other questions around kind of efficacy, generally, the efficacy for these vaccines are really high. Generally, vaccines are about kind of 60 to 70% effective. The flu vaccine is about kind of, you know, it can be anything between 40 and 70%. So, you know, so I think we've done really well to get really effective vaccines. Right. What are the side effects? Does it affect fertility? So the side effects that have been reported are the common ones, you know, pain, kind of nausea, a little bit kind of fluey, and then it wears off. In terms of that aspect around fertility, now the clinical trials that they did were on healthy volunteers, including women of childbearing age, and a lot of those women have gone on to have children. What we can't say, but you know, there is nothing in the vaccines that should affect fertility. But obviously we can't say that 100% as with anything in life, because actually it will only be kind of longer term that you really find out what the impact is. But, you know, fertility isn't an issue with vaccines, and there's nothing in there that should actually cause any concerns around fertility. So I would say that there definitely isn't any evidence that it has an impact on fertility. So, and then does the vaccine alter your DNA? No, it doesn't. As I said, it doesn't actually. Even the RNA that is injected with the Pfizer vaccine, it's like, yeah, it's kind of like a photocopy. It doesn't have the ability to go in and integrate into your DNA. All it does is cause your DNA to make that protein. So it has no ability to kind of alter your DNA or go into it, because it's also a synthetic DNA. It's not a synthetic RNA. It's not even from the virus. It's something that's been created synthetically. So what are the main differences between Pfizer and Oxford vaccines? How can they cover the new strains? So yeah, I forgot to mention that in my talk, because I think the issue around the mutating strains is a really important one. So mutations in viruses occur naturally all the time. It's absolutely something that we would expect. So viruses obviously work by replicating. And so when they replicate, there is a chance then that something will go wrong in that, essentially that photocopy, and something will happen and mutate. There are different types of mutations. You know, a mutation could occur and it won't affect the virus at all. A mutation could occur and actually it's more harmful for the virus and it will kill the virus quickly. And obviously that's really good, because that virus won't then spread. But occasionally there might be a mutation that makes the virus either makes the virus easier to transmit between people, or it makes it more kind of serious once people, virulent or serious when people get the virus, so they become more ill. Now, the strains that we're seeing come through are showing that they have the ability to spread more quickly. There isn't evidence at the moment to say that they cause a more serious condition. At the moment, it's about that transmissibility. But actually, the big thing is the more you transmit it, the more people that are likely to get really, really sick from the condition, as we know. And so the vaccines at the moment, there's already some, initially we thought that all of the vaccines would be fine, because the way that the vaccines are designed, if you think about kind of, I don't know, a person, a human being, we're all human beings. And if the virus was to, and if the vaccine, if you think of humans, was to kind of go after a feature that is in all people, like, I don't know, everybody having, blood or something like that, then that vaccine should work. But actually, if it's about something that is more on the surface, say like skin color, and actually the vaccine works better on people who have brown skin versus what kind of white skin, then that's where the difference comes in. And what we're seeing now is that there is a difference in how effective those vaccines are, because it seems like what we were targeting on the surface of the virus is different, and is not as present, or we can't as easily target it on the new strains. So I guess that those vaccines, especially ones like the AstraZeneca, so the Pfizer one is seeming to be is continuing to be effective in the new strains, but the AstraZeneca one, it seems to have a limited kind of efficacy against the South African strain, as people are saying. But I think where we are now is that we know how to make that vaccine. We know how it works, and actually we can quite quickly modify it and change it. Right. So sorry, I'm just looking through my questions. Do we need to take it if we have had COVID already and still have antibodies? This is a question that I get quite a lot, and yes, you still need to have it, ideally after about 3 weeks, and that's because natural immunity that we get following having an infection is good, but at the moment we don't know whether people can get COVID again, and there has been a lot of so we don't know how long that immunity that is generated following having the virus, how long that lasts, or how efficacious it is. And there's also been reports of people having COVID more than once. So it's still really important to have the vaccine, because also the response that is generated by a vaccine is slightly more sophisticated and targeted. And so, yes, it is better to have the vaccine if you've already had the virus. And then secondly, I think I had a related question here. So a sister had the virus, and she had the she had the vaccination and then found out she had COVID. And is that a concern? I think not. It might impact how it might impact how effective the vaccine is, but actually it shouldn't. You should still go back for your second dose of the vaccine. Okay, right. Has any testing been done or is being done for vaccine safety in children? So the way clinical trials work in the UK, we don't allow clinical trials on children under the age of 18 unless it's something for a pediatric condition. So unless the disease is something that affects children, we don't usually allow children to take part in these kinds of vaccination programs until we've got a lot more of the safety and efficacy data. But within the US, the regulations are slightly different. So I know that, for example, that Pfizer vaccine was tested in children over 12 years old, and it was found to be, completely safe and efficacious. But what we're saying here in the UK is that the vaccine is not going to be given to children under the age of 18 for now, until we find out more information, until there's been mass rollout amongst the population. The other thing to say is that the primary purpose of the vaccination program in the UK is not to create herd immunity, which I'm sure people have heard about. Sorry for that pun. Which people have heard about, which is where if you immunize a certain percentage of the population, so if you immunize 70% of the population, it will stop the virus transmitting and spreading. And what that means is people who are unable to have the vaccine or unwilling to have the vaccine are also protected, and it stops the transmission of the virus and kind of stops it in its track. At the moment, the focus is around reducing, giving the vaccines to stop serious kind of health to protect people who would otherwise get really seriously impacted by COVID. So it's to decrease the seriousness of the condition rather than to stop transmission. That data is coming, and actually we're looking at the data that's coming in from those original clinical trials, and now that we've got the mass vaccination programs, it will be easier for us to track whether herd immunity is being generated. But the primary purpose at the moment was about reducing the seriousness of the conditions. Okay, right, so I'm just going to check the other questions. Okay. Yeah, so I think Nargis just emailed me. It just sent that question through before I'd even seen it, and I think I've answered it. Is it true that the vaccine does not intend to cure or prevent us completely from getting COVID, but seeks to reduce the risk of hospitalizations? And that's true. That's why we've got a really strict kind of priority criteria in this country. So the hope is that once we get through those top 7 kind of priority groups, that should then dramatically reduce the number of hospitalizations that are occurring due to COVID, right? I don't think, right, let me go see if I understand. Okay. Right, I think I've answered most of those kind of more thingy, kind of generic questions. So I'll try and go back up, inshallah, and answer some of those. Okay. Those other questions. Okay, so should you take the vaccine if you're pregnant? And the answer is no, you shouldn't, unless you've had unless you've got an underlying health condition that makes you kind of at serious risk of kind of hospitalization, of having a serious impact if you've had COVID. That's not because we think the vaccine is unsafe. It's because those tests haven't been done on women who are pregnant. So that's why. But actually, if you're yeah, but so it is best to just kind of speak to your GP and just confirm that they're happy, you know, what you should do, especially if you're working on the front line and are at higher risk of getting the virus. But generally, the advice at the moment in the UK is you shouldn't have the you shouldn't have the vaccine if you're pregnant or breastfeeding until we have more information around that. Oh gosh, I'll just try. Sorry. Okay. Where can we find the sequencing information that the Chinese scientists worked out? So it should be on so I think it's the papers on, you know, it's publicly available. That's the other thing. A lot of the time, scientific research data is behind paywalls, so you have to pay to see the paper or whatever. But actually, with the coronavirus papers, anything that's COVID related, the publishers have made most of them publicly available and free to access. So that information is on the sequencing websites. Did they do any animal trials? How large was that trial? So that would have been at the kind of preclinical stages, and that's when they would have been looking at, you know, so before it went into humans. So I would, you know, so I would have to go back and look to see how many, what number of animals and things like that that they would have looked at. But often, if it's the technology, then that will have already been tested. Right, right. I think I've answered all the questions, unless. Right, okay. So my friend's parents had the vaccine a few weeks back, and today they've tested positive for COVID-19. Do they need to be vaccinated again? So they need to go back for their second dose. They won't get two vaccines. They'll go back for their second dose after that. So it is important. So right. So my husband is the only person who could have the vaccine. How effective would it be for him, considering 4 of us will be unvaccinated? So it would still be just as effective for him, because as I said, it's about that risk of so because it's about risking the severity of the illness. So so for him, he might catch it from those people who are unvaccinated, but likewise, we don't know whether the vaccine is actually stopping transmission at the moment. All we know that it's trying to reduce the severity of the illness. Well, is there any data on asymptomatic transmission from people who have been vaccinated? Can they still transmit and cause serious disease in people who are unvaccinated? Yes, they can. So that's the data that we're looking at the moment. So when I was talking about kind of herd immunity, at the moment we think that people who have had the vaccine can still transmit the virus, and that's what we're looking to understand is, so for herd immunity to truly be effective, if you've had the vaccine, then you wouldn't be able to transmit it. At the moment, we don't have enough data to say that, and we think that even if you've had the vaccine and you go on to get the virus yourself, you're still able to transmit it. But yes, but that's kind of more data to come on that. A doctor on here said we couldn't boost our immune system, especially giving things to children. What's your opinion on this? We know extra vitamin D and C has shown a difference. It's confusing when certain health workers are saying different things. Fortunately, that's with all scientists. We can never really agree on anything. And I would say that, if it doesn't do harm, then there's no harm in taking it. There is limited evidence around that. We know that we need certain levels of vitamins in our body, but actually, if you're having a balanced diet, then that should be enough, and you can't really boost your immune system. Is it safe for people with autoimmune diseases such as celiac? And actually, yes, it is. Those people were considered within the kind of clinically extremely vulnerable. So even people who are on immunosuppressants. The problem is that if you are kind of immunocompromised, then it's unlikely that, the vaccine is unlikely to work as effectively on you, and you should really check with your doctor to make sure that there aren't kind of any other contraindications, or that the vaccine is suitable for you as well. So if kids can't be vaccinated and they're super spreaders, what happens with schooling? We keep sending them back, spread the virus, go in lockdown and continue the cycle. Yes, yes, but I think that's more of a political question than anything else, and rather than a scientific one. I think we're all really struggling. So yeah, but just to say, also, the that the information that I'm kind of giving out is really just from my own opinion and my own understanding. So so if people choose to take the virus or not, the vaccine or not, that's really up to you. It's your personal choice to do that. And inshallah, I've provided you some information that is useful, but really, there's a lot of publicly available information out there. And at the end of the day, you need to kind of have that conversation with your doctor, with your family, to to recognize what and discuss whether you want the vaccine or not. So that is kind of a personal choice at the end of the day, and that wasn't the purpose of this talk. It was really just to try and address some of the questions that we were getting through quite a lot. But right, I'm going to go back into Facebook and just see if there are any last questions. If we're not immunocompromised and we never had COVID, should we still get the vaccine? So yes, so yes, the advice is that you should. Yep. So I think somebody else says quite a number of smaller contraindications, mainly anaphylaxis. Yeah. So yeah. So as I said, GP can advise you. Okay. I think that's all of the talk. I think that's okay. Yeah. So it says, yeah. So can you address if vaccines safe for those with allergies and immunocompromised people? Yeah, so as I said, so generally the vaccines are safe. If you have very specific allergies, you need to speak to your doctor to find out, because I don't obviously have a list of the complete ingredients. And so if there is something that you are specifically really allergic to, then speak to your doctor to understand whether that is a listed ingredient and known. But if you're immunocompromised, as I said, you can have the vaccine. And I've had family members who've had the vaccine whilst being on kind of immunosuppressants as well. So, but as I said, it's just about that effectiveness. But if you do have any kind of serious health conditions, it is best to speak to your GP and understand, because they will know your medical background much more and be able to advise on any specific issues. Oh, yeah, I think I've. Okay. My husband says my husband's due to have his second vaccine in May. If it's Ramadan, will his fast still count? That's a question of fiqh, but my understanding is that it will. And I've told my aunt she needs to go and have her second vaccine. Then as well. My understanding is that it doesn't affect your fast, but obviously, I'm not a scholar. I'm just saying that based on my own understanding. Okay, right. I think I've answered all of those questions, unless I've missed anything. Okay. Right. Okay, I think I've answered everything. But as I said, if you have got any specific allergies, do speak to your doctor, and they can advise you better. But my understanding, if you're allergic to penicillin, that shouldn't be an issue. But yeah, it's always best to make sure if you've got anything specific. Okay, I think that's it. So, oh. Okay, right. Okay, so thank you, sisters. Okay, Assalamu alaikum.